So tonight we're looking at this namespaced routes lab. And as we're going through this, if you have any questions, comments, anything that you want to look at a little bit deeper, feel free to just throw it out there in the chat window or just unmute yourself if you can and just say it and we'll look at it. So this evening, we'll be looking at this lab and the objectives being organize controllers using a module and using namespaced routes, use namespaced routes. So we're going to add some administrative functions to our song library. Using what we learned about namespaced routes and module scope, we'll organize our controllers and routes under an admin namespace to keep them separate from the regular user functions. Okay. Base application has been provided with tests. Make sure to run rake-tbc to set up the seed data. Test can be run with rspec. And we saw that we're not able to run rspec yet. And it looks like because we don't have our admin class created. Maybe. Yeah, uninitialized constant admin name error. So that's where we're at to start. So I guess, yeah, that would be a good place to start. Let's create that class and we'll go from there, I guess. Let's look at our spec. I'm going to assume we're starting with our model admin preferences controller. Let's look at the models. If I remember my rspec properly, spec models, does that work? Initialize constant preference, okay. So we got a preference spec, a song spec. All right. Look at our schema. Artist songs. Okay, so we don't have a preference. But what were we saying? Okay. My bad habit of stopping in the middle of the instructions. Looks like there's more info here. Note, since we're building a new feature on an existing project that already has tests, part of the job is to make sure the tests that already pass at the beginning still pass when you're done. Okay. Create a preference model that will store preferences for the app. All right, so there we go. Let's do that. Rails, generate migration, and that's all that I can ever remember. All right, Rails generate migration, create preferences. Preferences, it will need to have fields for song order, or song sort order. This will be used to control the default sort order on the songs page. Okay, let's see preference spec. So here we're going to see the attributes it needs. This also will make sure that we give them the right names so that the test will work correctly. So, all right, we have our song sort order. And it even tells us string, string, true, false. So, all right, song sort order. Put colon string artist sort order, which is also a string. Artist sort order. allow creation of new songs, allow creation of new artists, use control, use control. Okay, doesn't say anything about the default. So these just need to be Booleans. So allow create artists. Boolean. Allow create songs. Boolean. Okay, let's look at what that made for us. Okay, I'll open it on this side. Create preferences, create table preferences, do string song sort order, string artist sort order, Boolean allow create artist, Boolean allow create songs. Looks good to me. DB migrate. Schema should update with that. There we go. Looking good. So now, all right, what's next? Schema's good, I believe. Let's see what the lab is telling us. Create a preferences controller, routes and views to manage the preferences. Do this under an admin module to separate it from the standard user functionality. Okay, so here we get into our name spacing. So preferences under admin. So we'll have two things here. We'll need our controller, but we'll also need our config routes. So, let's go to the routes first. Let's see what our test is saying now. We still don't have any models for these, so they should still, yeah, be throwing errors. Preference and admin still don't exist. Okay. So let's go to config routes. Let's make these models. Models. Yeah. I want to get the tests working. So preference. We'll just start with preference from application record, and we should get a new error now here. Oh, no application record. Okay, so let's just do class. Oh, active record. Okay, that works. We'll do that right here. There we go. For example, 0 failures. Okay, so some of our tests are starting to pass again. So let's run our spec, see what's going on. Okay. So now we're at the admin class. That isn't working for us. And this is where, let's get our route set up to namespace. So we're going to have these preferences, but they're going to be underneath admin. So this is more of the routing. So let's go to our routes. We have resources for artists. We have resources for songs. So let's make resources for our preferences. Preferences. However, this is where we need to do our namespacing. So let's do that right here. So what we do is we say namespace. Oh. Now we have our admin with a do block. And then we pass in the resources. And actually, let's look at this. Put this, oh, that looks crazy. Put this back down here. And I want to rake routes a few times as we change this so we can see the differences. Okay, so we have our songs and we have our artists. And actually, let me comment these up too, just to make it very straightforward. So we'll just we have our resources. If we do rake routes, we see we have all of our preferences. Routes. Now with our namespace, let's look at how this changes. So we've pretty much just thrown it inside of this admin. So really we haven't changed too much. We have this namespace controller. So how we set up our controller is going to be a little bit different. And our URI pattern is nested. However, outside of that, we're not looking at any real big structure changes here. Just really how we're going to be getting to these things. So let's go ahead and uncomment the rest of this out. So we have all of our routes again. It's going to be a bunch now. We still see we have our admin preferences. It's namespaced. Pull this down. We got that one done. And this other model too is good. Okay. So now that we've got our route set up, we need to set up this preferences controller, like our, all right, so we did our routes, haven't done our views, but we need our preferences controller. And this needs to be under the admin module. So this is going to be a little bit different as well. Let's look at our controller. So we'll make our preferences controller. So class, we'll set this up. In a standard fashion. And let's just put an index in here to have one. It says set up views, but I honestly don't think there's any views that we use in this lab. We'll see if the tests hit them. So let's see what we get now. So we're probably still going to hit this admin. Yes. So here's where our namespacing comes into our controller. So since we namespaced with admin, we're going to change our class name. Say admin with our double colon. And see where that takes us. Excuse me. Okay, still looking for it. Configure routes, did our preferences, did our schema. Let's see, what are we missing now? Admin preference.
Should the preferences controller be in an admin folder?
Yes. Let's see what we get. Still our uninitialized constant admin preferences controller. Let's see. Preferences controller. Let's see. Application controller. Let's see. What is our application controller saying? From action controller base, protect from forgery with exception, and something's missing. What is it? Our routes were looking good. Admin. I didn't think we needed the admin model. Maybe we do. Admin preferences. No. What's missing? Something's missing. It's not coming to me right now. Resources, artist songs, admin preferences. That was looking fine. This is working. Oh, I think I named this wrong. Preferences. There we go. Okay. It's always that one letter missing somewhere. Cool. So yes, inside the admin folder, nested is our preferences controller. And let's see. Okay. Has an index page. Failure, missing template. So we do need a view. So let's build that one out. Views, folder. Let's see, where are we going? Get index, but response to be okay. Index. Response to be okay. Okay, so yeah, I didn't think there was any views. Views. Actually, our view will need to be nested too. Folder, admin, preferences, index.html.erp. Respect Rails view rendering empty template path selector decorator. That should return fine. Okay, we're moving along. Artist controller. Get new redirects when access is turned off. Okay. So let's get into our artist controller now. Oh, that's spec. Okay. So now we need to start thinking about the concept of who has access to create new artists. So this we'll probably need to look at the spec for to see exactly what we need to do. Spec artist controller. Let's go songs controller too. Put that over there. There we go. I believe that's good. Okay. Redirects when access is turned off. So it's looking at a preference. Create, allow create artist false, get new, expect response. It's redirect to artist path. So we're going to new. Let's say if and else and. So we're going to want two different things here. And let's see. Preference. Where will we get our preference from? See if we hit that going through our tests. Okay, cool. Don't think there's any params, just controller and action. Let's see. Have one preference. I think if I remember right, there wasn't an explicit way that we're getting past the preference. No, we're not. Okay, so well, I don't think the real world would operate like this. For our lab, it will. So we have one preference in our database, as we saw. So our if is going to be preference.first, just the preference in our data, the only preference we have in our database. And then that's what we're going to look at. So preference.first dot allow create artists. So if we're saying if this preference is saying true, we're going to let them build it. Else, we want to redirect. Now we can see how this preference would be useful in a production setting, not implemented this way, of course, because this is going to be a static preference that is going to maintain, and then anybody who got here. But if you logged in and you had this preference, actually, yeah, I guess you could only get to this. You had this preference behind, some sort of authentication wall, and you would set it, and that would be how you get to these things. So only certain people would have the preference. So maybe if this was, something like if user dot current or current user dot allow first create artists or current user dot preferences or something like that. But in this instance, this is going to be how we implement this system. And it isn't the most, what can I say, obvious pattern, because I don't think it necessarily logically make sense. Should be refactored some. But also you kind of have to dive off a lot deeper end to wire all the pieces together. So this is just kind of a view into what you can do with it. So we see that passes, and a bunch of other things start passing too with that. But yeah, the only way to see that what we need in this instance is to just look at the preference gets created, and that's what we're using in this test. But there's no other attachment to anything in this case. So in this instance, for the testing, we really have to look at, or for the coding, we really have to look at the test and read it and understand what's going on to get our test to pass. Otherwise, we'd probably be stuck here for a little bit. But debugging always helps. Dropping in a pry, seeing what's available to us, what's around, what's wired up in this instance. So let's go to our next one, songs controller spec, line 27. So we have test gets rid of all the songs and artists, creates an artist. That artist gets a song. Then these tests are passing because we said we had some tests passing already. Okay, 27. Or line 27. Oh, I closed the wrong controller. This is the one we need. Oh, spec. Keep getting backwards. Songs controller. Here we go. Close that one out. Let's make some more space. Okay. Songs get controller new redirects when access is turned off. Okay. Oh, there's a lot more code in here. New. So based on our last example in the artist controller, what do we think we're doing in this time?
The same thing, but with the allow create songs.
Yeah. Yep. Nothing special in this one. If preference dot first allow create songs, we're gonna create the song. Else, we're gonna allow them to create the song. We're going to redirect to songs path. And let's see what our tests tell us after that. And that is all of them. Huh. I honestly thought there was more to this, to keep going in this lab. But I do remember specifically getting stuck in this lab on this preference and how to access it and how to use it, because it's not intuitive to just look at a class and think, okay, I'm just going to grab the first preference that's created, and that's what I'm going to use for my, we feel like this is some sort of authorization to allow us to create songs. But if we're just looking at the first, preference created, then everybody is going to be able to make songs. And that is true in this case. So as far as getting it all wired up behind some sort of auth wall where, only specific people with this preference can do these actions, it's hard to wrap our minds around what these tests are looking for, or what this test specifically is looking for, because I guess it doesn't make logical sense. And that's true, but it's part of the process. If we had everything needed to do that in a singular lab, it would be way confusing. Cool. Any questions about these things? So we've gone through, let me close the spec down. We've looked at configuring the routes and how this changes things in our rake routes. We've looked at how to build our controller in a namespaced fashion and nested inside a folder. We've seen the same thing with the views, nested inside themselves. Nothing in this index in this lab, but so the same thing with that. Now we build the namespace with the double colon, and then we build out the controllers using the preference. However, that was pretty straightforward once we figured out how do we use the preference in this lab. What qualifier do we use? And the only qualifier that we have is grab the first one. And then we created a migration too. And got that info from our spec. It's typically how I attack these labs when they have migrations to be written. I look in the spec and look at the properties that it uses in a create method, and that typically gets me pretty close to finishing up that migration with the types of variables or the type of the field and the name of those properties. So after that, now, any questions, comments, concerns about this lab, namespaced routes? I think they make more sense once you get some authorization on them. They get also more complicated at the same time, but this is being recorded. Jordan, I saw that in the chat after you left, but I guess I'll just say that because when you watch it, you'll hear your name and be happy. Nothing? Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, comments, concerns, issues, thank you so much for coming, hanging out. I'm putting the study group feedback form into the chat. So